Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something straight up. When you ignore someone, they don't just move on. They start thinking. And not just thinking, overthinking. Every action has a reaction. And when you back off, it does something to the person you're dealing with. When you choose to ignore someone, you're not just pulling away from them physically. You're creating a space that forces them to fill the silence with their own thoughts. Silence is a tool, not a sign of weakness. It makes them wonder, makes them question what they've done or failed to do. In the absence of your voice, they start to hear everything, every word you've ever said, every moment you shared, every gesture you made. The silence amplifies their inner dialogue, and soon they begin to overthink everything. What went wrong? Why aren't you there? The more you stay quiet, the louder the echoes in their mind become. When you're always present, when you're always available, there's no room for them to appreciate your presence. But when you step back, it creates a shift in their perception. They begin to see you differently, not just as a constant fixture in their life, but as someone with value they might have taken for granted. The distance between you forces them to reflect, to reassess what they had. They start noticing the things they overlooked, the moments that mattered, the things you brought to the table. In their mind, you become more than just a part of their routine. You become something worth missing. The human ego doesn't like to be ignored. It thrives on attention, validation, and being noticed. When you withhold your presence, you challenge their ego. Suddenly, they feel as though something is slipping from their grasp. And that feeling of losing control is what fuels their thoughts. They start to question why you're no longer as engaged, as present as before. The more you withhold, the more they wrestle with their own insecurity, trying to figure out what's missing and why they can't seem to get it back. This struggle to regain control of the situation is what keeps them hooked mentally and emotionally in a way they didn't anticipate. When you refuse to entertain their behavior or give in to their demands, they start to crave your attention. This isn't a matter of manipulation, it's human nature. People don't truly realize what they value until it's no longer right in front of them. And when they feel your absence, they begin to long for your presence. It's a feeling of incompleteness, something that they try to ignore but can't. They'll search for reasons to justify their actions or their lack of effort, but deep down, they know something's missing, and that missing piece is you. It becomes a quiet desperation to reconnect, to fix what's been broken. As the power dynamic shifts, you start to see the effects of your absence. The moment you stop chasing, stop being constantly available, they start to feel the imbalance. The tables have turned. No longer are they the ones in control of the interaction or the situation. Now, it's on them to prove that they deserve your time and attention. And while they may try to play it cool, there's a realization dawning on them. You're no longer there to fulfill their needs, and they have to step up. They may not admit it, but the respect they didn't show before begins to creep in. When you demand the space and distance to protect your own energy, you automatically command respect. And with that respect, they start thinking about you like never before. When you're always around, it's easy for someone to take you for granted. Your presence becomes part of the background, and they don't have to think too much about it. But the moment you step back, things begin to change. Your absence forces them to adjust, to see the world without your constant influence. It's like a jolt to their system, one that shakes up their daily routine and forces them to recognize the things they've ignored. They no longer have you to rely on, and that alone makes them take a harder look at what they once had. In the absence of your constant presence, they start to see the things they didn't notice before. Maybe it's the way you bring calm into chaos, or how you always seem to know what they need without them asking. Maybe it's the way your energy fills the room, or the way you offer support without hesitation. These things don't just go unnoticed. They've always been there. But it's only when you step away that they begin to understand just how much you were contributing to their life. It's a shift in their perspective, one that happens when they realize that they no longer have access to the value you bring. What's interesting about this shift is that it doesn't always happen right away. At first, they might not even recognize the change. But as time passes and you remain distant, their mind starts to process what they're missing. The absence begins to speak louder than your presence ever did. They realize that you weren't just a filler in their life. You were a foundation and anchor they didn't appreciate until now. And that's when they begin to think about you differently. They start to see you for what you really are, not just as someone they can rely on without thinking, but as someone who adds genuine value to their world. This shift in perspective can be a powerful thing. It makes them see you not just as part of their routine, but as a person they can't afford to overlook. The longer you're not there, the more they begin to question how much they've taken you for granted. They start to see that your absence isn't just a temporary inconvenience, it's a wake-up call. You've made them realize that you are someone who brings something unique to the table, someone they can't replace with ease. And while they might not openly admit it, there's a new level of respect that begins to grow within them. The longer you stay away, the more they start to see the full scope of what you offered. It becomes clear that your value wasn't just in what you gave them in the moment, it was in the consistency, the reliability, and the way you made them feel. They may never have fully understood the weight of your presence until it was no longer there. But once they start seeing you in a new light, they begin to understand that you were never just another face in the crowd. You were the one who mattered, and in your absence, they finally realize it. When you choose to ignore someone, you're tapping into a very powerful dynamic, the human ego. The ego thrives on validation, recognition, and attention. It needs to feel important, seen, and heard. So when you withhold that attention, it strikes at the core of their self-perception. They start feeling like they're not as significant as they thought they were in your life. This sense of being overlooked or dismissed becomes a threat to their own sense of worth, and it's something they can't easily shake off. In response, the ego doesn't just sit back and accept the silence. No, it goes into overdrive trying to figure out why you've pulled away. What did they do wrong? Was there something they missed? What changed? This becomes a mental puzzle that they need to solve, and it eats at them. They can't let go of it. The longer you remain distant, the more their mind races trying to come up with reasons, scenarios, or explanations. They search for the answer, even if it means they're overanalyzing every interaction, every word, every action. The ego needs closure, and it will do anything to find it. But here's the thing. They won't find it, at least not in the way they want to. They can't control how you feel or why you've chosen to step back, and that's where the struggle begins. The ego can't accept that it's not in control of the situation, and that discomfort makes them think about you even more. It makes them obsess over what might be going wrong and how to fix it. What's interesting is that the more they try to figure it out, the more their thoughts are consumed with you, even if they're pretending otherwise. They can't shake the feeling that something is missing and that something is you. As their mind keeps spinning, they start to feel vulnerable, something the ego doesn't handle well. They begin to realize that they're no longer the one in charge of the narrative. You've shifted the dynamic in a way that they didn't expect, and they're left grappling with a sense of uncertainty. The ego's natural instinct is to regain control, but when you're ignoring them, that control slips further away. They start to recognize that they might have been too comfortable, too secure in their place in your life, and now they have to reckon with the consequences of their actions or lack thereof. Eventually, this ongoing mental turmoil can lead to a shift in how they view you. They start to crave your attention, not because they necessarily want you, but because the ego can't stand being left in the dark. The absence of your presence makes them realize just how much they relied on you to validate their sense of importance. What started as a challenge to their ego soon becomes a realization. You were never just someone they could take for granted. When you step back, you don't just change how they see you, you change how they see themselves. And that is what makes them think about you more than ever before. The more you withhold, the more intense this mental journey becomes. The mystery no longer feels like a passing thought, it becomes a challenge. The more time they spend trying to piece things together, the more they convince themselves that they need to know what's really going on with you. Their curiosity transforms into obsession. What are you doing when you're not around them? Who are you spending time with? What has shifted in your life that led you to pull away? These questions swirl around in their mind, creating a whirlwind of thoughts they can't escape. As the mystery deepens, you become a constant presence in their thoughts, even when you're not physically around. You've planted yourself in their mind, and now every move they make, every decision they encounter will somehow bring them back to you. They'll be looking for hints, looking for signs that you might let them back in, but at the same time, they'll fear that the mystery will remain unsolved forever. The more you resist providing them with clarity, the stronger the pull becomes. They can't shake the feeling that they need answers, and you're the only one who holds the key to those answers. In the end, the mystery doesn't just make you harder to forget, it makes you unforgettable. When someone is left to wonder, their mind is forced to hold on to that curiosity. It burns in the background of their thoughts, always there, always nagging at them. You've become more than a person in their life. You've become a question, a curiosity that lingers long after the silence has passed. And with that, you gain something far more powerful than their attention. You gain their fixation. When you pull away from someone, something powerful begins to happen. Initially, they might not even notice the void you've left behind. They continue on with their day-to-day lives, unaware of the subtle role you played in keeping their world balanced. But as time passes and you remain distant, they begin to feel it. The quiet absence of your presence starts to stand out in ways they never anticipated. The little things that once felt insignificant, your voice, your touch, the way you filled the silence, begin to matter more than they ever did before. And in that absence, a sense of longing starts to grow, something they weren't fully aware of until it was gone. At first, they might try to dismiss it. Life continues after all, and they might tell themselves that they can manage without you. But the more time goes on, the clearer it becomes. Something is missing. The rhythms of their daily life aren't quite the same without you in the picture. They didn't realize how much of their energy was fueled by your presence, how much of their joy came from the way you supported them or made them laugh. The absence isn't just about missing you. It's about realizing that they took for granted all the little ways you made their world brighter. And that realization hits harder than they expected. As the days turn into weeks, they start to appreciate what they once had. It's not just the obvious things like your laughter or your attention, but the deeper aspects of your presence. Maybe it was your unwavering support, the way you always knew just what to say when they needed it most. Maybe it was the calm you brought into their chaos, or the confidence you instilled in them when they doubted themselves. It's only when you step back that they start to see all of these things for what they truly were: invaluable. They start to understand just how much they relied on you and how your energy was intertwined with their own. They might begin to reflect on the times they took you for granted, the moments when they didn't show the appreciation you deserved, when they were too caught up in their own world to notice how much you were doing for them. Now, with you out of the picture, that lack of appreciation becomes glaringly obvious. The regret starts to creep in. They wish they had said more, done more, acknowledged the value you brought into their life while they had the chance. But now, it's too late. And they can't undo the moments that pass without them fully understanding your importance. In the end, this absence forces them into a position of growth. They don't just miss you because of the things you did for them. They miss you because they now recognize your worth in ways they never did before. The space you've left behind serves as a constant reminder of what they had and what they've lost. It's only through your absence that they can fully appreciate the depth of your presence, and it's this newfound understanding that makes them realize how much they truly need you. When you stop giving someone the attention they expect, it begins to create an undeniable void in their life. Initially, they might brush it off, telling themselves that they can handle it, that they don't need your presence or reassurance. But as time goes on, the absence of your attention starts to weigh on them. The routine they once knew now feels off, incomplete. Even the moments that seemed trivial before now feel like something is missing, and they can't help but notice it. Without your connection, their world doesn't feel as solid as it once did. And they begin to realize just how much they relied on your presence. The craving for that connection doesn't happen immediately. It's a gradual buildup, a subtle shift in how they experience their day-to-day life. At first, they might dismiss it as nothing more than a fleeting feeling, something they can easily ignore. But the longer the distance persists, the harder it becomes to deny the emptiness that's creeping in. They begin to feel like something essential is lacking, even though they can't pinpoint exactly what it is. They've come to depend on the bond they once shared with you, and without it, they feel as though a piece of themselves is missing. This growing sense of loss gradually transforms into a deep desire to reconnect. They might not even fully understand why they feel this way, but there's an undeniable urge to bridge the gap you've created. The idea of reclaiming that connection becomes an obsession, something they can't stop thinking about. They realize that the space you've left behind isn't just a temporary gap. It's a constant reminder of the emotional fulfillment they once had. The more time they spend without it, the stronger their longing grows, and they start to feel incomplete in ways they hadn't anticipated. As this desire to reconnect builds, they start to second-guess themselves. They begin to wonder if they did something to push you away, if they missed something important along the way. The absence of your attention leaves them vulnerable to their own insecurities. They might replay past conversations looking for signs that they overlooked, wondering if there were things they should have said or done differently. The more they realize how much they miss you, the more they struggle with the fact that they may not be able to get back what they once had. The uncertainty makes them uneasy, yet the need to restore that connection remains strong. Eventually, this longing for reconnection leads them to reconsider their actions and choices. They might reach out, try to rekindle what's been lost, or at least seek some form of closure. But the desire to reconnect goes deeper than simply wanting your attention again. It's about the recognition of how much your presence meant to them. They've come to realize that without you, they're missing a vital part of their life. They can't ignore the emptiness anymore, and that's what drives them to take the first step toward regaining what was lost. The moment you stop giving someone what they expect from you, they begin to feel like they've lost something crucial. It's not just about attention or affection. It's a deeper sense of control that they once held over the situation. They've grown accustomed to having a certain power, knowing that your actions and your responses could be easily predicted. But when you pull away, it shakes that foundation. Suddenly, they find themselves in uncharted territory, and the certainty they once relied on slips away. This loss of control becomes a challenge they can't ignore, and they start to struggle with it, trying desperately to regain what's been taken from them. As the feeling of losing control sets in, they begin to fight back in subtle ways. They might become more persistent, trying harder to reach out, to provoke a response from you, to somehow reconnect in a way that restores their sense of dominance. Their thoughts become consumed with ways to regain the upper hand, whether through manipulation, emotional appeals, or simply trying to get you to react. Every action becomes a calculated effort to regain the balance they once held so effortlessly. What they don't realize is that the harder they fight to restore control, the more they are falling into a trap you've set with your silence and absence. While they're struggling to regain control, they don't understand that their efforts are only pushing them further away from you. Their need to control the situation only feeds into your hands. The more they try to assert their dominance, the more they reveal just how much they need validation from you. In their mind, the power dynamic is a zero-sum game. If they can't control you, then they feel like they're losing. But in reality, by fighting to control you, they're giving you the power to shape the situation. They're essentially doing the exact opposite of what they intend. And it becomes clear that the more they try to grab hold, the further out of their reach you slip. This struggle for control not only becomes exhausting for them, but also makes them more aware of how much they've relied on your availability and your attention. They begin to see how much of their identity, or at least their sense of importance, was tied to the way you responded to them. Without your constant engagement, they begin to question their own value. The harder they push for control, the more they expose their own vulnerabilities. They thought they were in charge, but now they're learning that the only person who truly held power in this dynamic was you. Their struggle becomes a painful reminder of their own dependency on you. In the end, what they fail to recognize is that their fight for control has already lost the battle. They're working harder, thinking harder, and putting in more energy to regain something that is already beyond their grasp. The more they push, the more they tighten the grip you have over them without even realizing it. What they once thought was a fight for power has, in fact, become a surrender. The struggle for control has not made them stronger. It has made them weaker because it's shown them just how much they need you to feel whole. And while they're still scrambling to win back what they think they've lost, they've already lost the battle in ways they can't yet understand. When you pull away from someone, it's not just your absence that they feel, it's the unsettling realization that they might lose you for good. They may not immediately show it, but deep inside, a fear begins to grow. The fear of losing you is subtle but powerful, and it starts to consume their thoughts. At first, they might try to push it away, thinking that they can handle the distance or that it's just a temporary thing. But as time passes and they feel the gap between you widening, that fear starts to dig deeper. They begin to wonder if they've already pushed you too far and if you're slipping out of their life for good. This fear triggers a self-reflection that they didn't expect. They begin to look inward, revisiting the moments where they might have failed you or where they took you for granted. They replay past interactions, considering whether they said the wrong things or failed to do what you needed. Every mistake, every missed opportunity to show you they cared starts to weigh heavily on them. They might even start to question their own worth, wondering if they were ever deserving of your time and attention in the first place. The realization that they could lose you forever forces them to confront the mistakes they've made, which they've likely been avoiding up until now. As this fear intensifies, it starts to shift their mindset. The need to fix things becomes urgent. They begin to think about what they can do to make things right, how they can win you back. In their mind, the fear of losing you is now a problem that requires immediate action. They might try to reach out more often, send messages, or attempt to reestablish the connection they feel slipping away. But despite their best efforts, they're still unsure whether it's too late. And that uncertainty only adds to the anxiety. The harder they try to fix things, the more they start to realize that you might not be as easily reached as they hoped, which only increases the sense of desperation. This shift in their behavior is exactly what you were hoping for. When you step back and create space, you force them to confront the consequences of their actions. You stop being the one who constantly forgives, constantly accommodates, and instead, you allow them to face the reality of their choices. You've created a situation where they are no longer in control, where their fear of losing you is driving them to rethink their behavior and their approach. And in doing so, you've made them think about you in a way they never did before. They begin to realize that your presence in their life is not something to be taken for granted, and they start to see the true value of what you brought to the table. This fear of losing you is transformative for them. It makes them more aware of the emotional stakes involved in your relationship, and it forces them to take responsibility for the role they played in creating the distance between you. They can no longer avoid the consequences of their actions, and the fear of losing you becomes a powerful catalyst for change. It's not just about getting you back, it's about realizing the depth of the connection you shared and understanding that without it, their life would feel incomplete. Through your absence, they come to see just how much you really meant to them, and that fear becomes the driving force that compels them to make things right. When you're constantly there, offering your time, attention, and energy, it's easy to fall into a pattern where the power in the relationship is unbalanced. You give, and they take, without much thought or effort to reciprocate. At first, this might feel natural or even comfortable, but the more you give, the more the power shifts in their favor. They come to expect your presence, your support, your availability, and it becomes a part of their routine. They no longer have to work to earn your attention. They know that you will always be there when they need you, and that reassurance can breed complacency. However, when you decide to pull back and stop being so available, the power dynamic begins to change. The absence of your constant presence creates an uncomfortable space that forces them to realize something important. They can no longer take your attention for granted. You've shifted the rules of engagement, and now the responsibility falls on them to prove that they deserve your time and energy. They can no longer rely on you being there at their convenience. They now have to work to regain the connection they once had with you. The dynamic has shifted, and it's no longer as simple as them receiving everything they want without effort. As they feel the distance grow, the reality starts to set in. They realize that their once secure position, where they could count on you being there whenever they chose, is no longer guaranteed. They may start to feel uneasy, uncertain about how to navigate this new dynamic. The absence of your constant support puts them in a position where they have to question their own behavior and whether they've taken you for granted. The balance has shifted, and now they have to prove that they are worthy of the connection they once had. a task that requires more effort than they anticipated. This shift can be incredibly powerful because it forces them to face the consequences of their actions. They can no longer rely on you to fill the space in their life without effort. The challenge now lies in them working to reestablish the connection, to show you that they are worthy of your time and attention. It's no longer just about them receiving, it's about them earning your presence, which requires introspection, self-awareness, and sometimes even a change in how they approach the relationship. The power dynamic has completely flipped, and they now find themselves in the position of having to prove themselves. As time goes on and they realize the significance of your absence, the value of your attention becomes clearer to them. What once seemed like a given is now something they have to fight for. The power that was once entirely in their hands is now in yours, and they are left with the task of earning back what they took for granted. This shift in power forces them to reassess their priorities, and they come to understand that maintaining your attention isn't something to be taken lightly. They are no longer the ones controlling the situation you are in. That realization changes how they think about you, how they value you, and how they approach the relationship moving forward. When you choose to ignore someone, you shift the entire dynamic of the relationship. What once seemed like an endless flow of attention and effort from your side now stops, creating an abrupt change that forces them to reassess their approach. At first, they might not understand why the shift occurred, but over time, they begin to realize that the attention they once received is no longer guaranteed. This absence creates a void that is hard to ignore, and it forces them to confront their behavior, pushing them to recognize that they might have taken you for granted. The moment you step back and give them space, it creates an opportunity for reflection. They start to notice that the comfort of knowing you'll always be there for them is gone. With your silence comes a sense of uncertainty that they can no longer avoid. It's no longer about whether you'll reach out, but about whether they will be able to earn back what they once took for granted. This shift in attention forces them to acknowledge the value of your presence in their lives. They begin to see that you are always giving them something precious, something that now seems harder to come by. As they process this change, they also start to recognize the value of your time and energy. The absence of your attention forces them to see just how much you brought to the relationship, whether through support, kindness, or simply being there when they needed it. The fact that you are no longer readily available makes them realize how much they relied on you, and in that realization, they develop a new understanding of your worth. This is when the shift in respect begins to happen. They start to treat you differently, not because you demand it, but because they have come to see that you are no longer someone who will just give without consideration. What's powerful about this transformation is that it's not something you need to announce or force. It's a natural result of setting boundaries and making it clear that your time and energy are not unlimited. By choosing to withdraw, you are teaching them the importance of respect for your time, for your presence, and for your emotional investment. You stop being someone they can easily take advantage of, and that alone forces them to approach you with a newfound level of awareness. They can no longer expect to get what they want without putting in the effort or showing appreciation for what you bring to the table. Ultimately, when you pull back, you regain control of the situation without saying a word. The moment you stop giving without receiving, you command respect without demanding it. They may not always vocalize their new understanding, but the change in their behavior is evident. They now see you as someone whose time and presence have value, and they treat you accordingly. It's in this quiet, subtle shift that the respect you've always deserved begins to return. And with it, the relationship finds a new, healthier balance.